Welcome to The Switch, not another podcast. The Switch is a collaboration between Baseload Capital and DNB, aiming to accelerate the green transition. We want our podcast to be a central hub for knowledge exchange within the fields of renewables and green transition. Hosted by Kristina Hagström-Ilevska and produced by Emil and Jacob. He is the Vice President of Business Strategy for OGCI Climate Investments. He has more than 30 years of experience in strategy, sustainability, and operational roles. And what does OGCI stand for? Let me tell you. Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. And OGCI is what happens when the world's biggest oil and gas companies decides to collaborate and to do something for the climate. In today's episode, you will find out more about the main achievements and future goals of OGCI, as well as the main hurdles in its mission. Let's give a warm Switch welcome to today's guest, Matthew Harwood.
Welcome to The Switch, not another podcast, Matthew. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm really happy to be here.
I actually attacked you the other day when you were sitting in a panel.
Yeah, you did attack me. Yeah.
You really impressed me, and soon enough the audience is also going to listen in and
I get
say
that a lot. I'm only joking.
But the fun thing is to tell a story is that there was a long line waiting for you, and there was one after the other pitching their companies. And I came up to you and I said, I'm not going to pitch you anything. I just want to broadcast you.
I know, and it was lovely to get that. And then we met up and agreed to do this just 2 days later. So fantastic. Thank you for making the approach.
It's a privilege. You're representing OGCI.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we're also going to talk because you have an extensive experience in strategy and when it comes to sustainability and climate.
Yeah.
So I'll dive into the questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay, good. First of all, you and I know what OGCI is, but can you tell the audience Oil and Gas Climate Initiative? What is it?
Yeah, well, it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration between 12 of the largest, probably best known oil and gas companies in the world, who got together a little over 5 years ago and agreed that they needed to do something collectively on climate. It's clearly a massive issue for them strategically, and they formed this organization as a collective, a collaboration. Very unusual because those big companies and their names that everyone will know: BP, Shell, Total, Exxon, Chevron, CNPC. Equinor,
big names that actually account for, what is it, like 30%?
Correct. 30 to 40% of the oil and gas industry. So, a very, very strong representation of the oil and gas industry. And they came together, they formed our organization, and they started to work on strategy and policy to guide the industry going forward in terms of how to address the issue of climate change. This has led to a number of different initiatives coming out of this collaboration, including setting targets for the carbon intensity of oil and gas operations, both in terms of CO2 emissions, but also in terms of methane emissions, which is a very important subject.
And actually, today it came out, not today, but a couple of days ago, it came out a really impressive report around this area as well. So the collaboration has been working for a couple of years now, and you came out with an announcement. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so people who study this area may know that at COP26 in Glasgow, there was a strong initiative around methane where so many countries agreed to cut methane emissions across different sectors, and it was always understood that oil and gas would have to take a big portion of that loan. And since that announcement, OGCI has been working on a further pledge from the industry to remove practically all of the methane from our operations by 2030. So the announcement that you were talking about was really, this ambition signed by all of the CEOs of those companies to get methane emissions as close to zero as possible by 2030, and to treat them like you would treat a safety incident or an oil spill. So you would always want to absolutely minimize those things, and the philosophy is to start treating methane emissions in the same way as you would treat accidents or fatalities in your operations.
And for those who don't know, methane is even more dangerous actually to the climate than CO2 emissions.
That's right. It is has a very, very strong radiative forcing, so it absorbs a lot of the heat, and is actually, in terms of how much heat it absorbs, it's close to 100 times more impactful than CO2. But it does decay in the atmosphere quite quickly relative to carbon dioxide. So we generally use a number of around 30 times more per kilogram, more impactful than CO2. But yes, you're right. It is a particularly potent greenhouse gas, which is why the focus.
It's quite interesting. I mean, and in that sense, it's also quite impressive. I mean, COP26 had its progresses, but it also had its problems.
Yeah.
And what they weren't able to agree about, you got them to agree about.
Well, there's still work to do. So we, as our community, as we said, is only 30 to 40% of the production, but we do have partnerships, relationships, JVs across the world with a variety of different other organizations. And so another part of the commitment is to work with our friends and partners across the world to try and bring others into the same pledge. So that is part of the work.
Yeah, because the organization is led by these 12 companies.
Correct, yes.
But you also have investments, and you have invested in a lot of portfolio companies. I guess that those are the ones you can also affect.
Yeah, so that thank you for that. That comes on to the second part of our organization. So a little while after OGCI was formed, the company said, "Hey, we want to actually do more. We want to actually start investing in technologies that can start to support this change and support this mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions." So a fund was established called Climate Investments, and each company put in $100 million into this fund.
It's a huge amount,
which is a large amount of money, and with the remit to invest in technologies and projects which can have a significant and relatively near-term impact on greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the part of the organization that I actually represent, the investment fund, and we've invested in 25 projects and companies so far. You and I are sitting here in this podcast in Houston, Texas, at a conference, and we brought 16 of these companies with us to this conference, and they've been talking about many subjects here with the community and with clients.
Was this the reason why there was a long queue and everybody pitching?
I think, yes, it was very interesting actually, because after I presented, we had a lot of really interesting technologies. And that's one of the lovely things about the job that I have and my colleagues have. You get to listen to wonderful, people talking about their ideas and their passions and their business plans, and that's just a real pleasure. It's very energizing, and today it was just lovely to have them all together. Actually talking to all of our investees, talking to each other about sharing perspectives and seeking ways to collaborate as well. So the investment fund, we've invested about with ongoing commitments about half of our capital. But I think really important to mention is that the fund's really driven by impact and seeking greenhouse gas mitigation impact by 2030, and that's really our number one metric. Is if we invest in a company, how much GHG emission can it avoid, essentially, and that's the first question we ask when we really talk to a new company or a new technology.
What kind of companies are there in this that you have in the portfolio companies?
Well, there's three broad areas that we invest in. The first is around methane. We were just talking about methane. So while we've set targets for the industry on methane, we wanted to have the tools to deliver on those targets. So we've invested in companies that can measure methane, detect it from satellites, from aircraft or drones, or indeed on the ground with ground-based instruments. And we've invested in technologies that can help solve the problem. So where you have a leak, what can you do about it? And so we have technologies to reduce the emissions of methane once they've been found. The second vertical is around carbon capture, utilization and storage. We have a very strong focus on that theme. And it was actually a huge theme this week in Sierra Week here in this conference as well. And the third area is really around energy efficiency, but we are really focused on certain segments. We want to be focusing on some of the less loved segments. So, for example, we haven't been investing in electric vehicles because that's already, it's a very active sector. But we are looking at things like building materials, industry, heavy industry, steel, cement, some of those sectors that have a large carbon footprint, but perhaps haven't had so much attention in terms of capital and innovation. And so that's the third.
Are they startups or are they scale-ups or are they anything in between?
Well, we tend to like technologies which can have an impact by 2030 because we have to take out half of the carbon emissions by 2030. Basically, is what the IPCC are telling us. So we have to go fast. So we unfortunately, if it's still on the laboratory bench, very low technology readiness level, then we sadly often pass because we really want to support scale up to 2030. But there are other funds out there that are really very happy to invest in the seed capital and very early stage technologies. But we have more of a scale up kind of mentality.
Right. And if you go back to the bigger organization as well, we know what you've accomplished so far, but what are the plans for the future? And we have net carbon, zero carbon and all of that, but what is the vision for OGCI?
Well, we have to now, we've set out these targets and aspirations. We now really need to start utilizing the technology to deliver. I'll just give you an example.
What does that mean? I have to put utilize it. What does that mean?
I need to get this in as well. What does that mean? So, I'll just give you an example on methane. So we've seen so much methane leaking, but we haven't yet found the best way of communicating to all of the owners of those assets how that it's happening and how they can actually go and mitigate that. So it's just a huge opportunity to get the technology out there, to do better work, communicate with our clients better, to have more impact. And I think that is really, now we've set the targets, we've got the technology, it's into action now. Really, there needs to be intense activity.
Do you have hopes for the future with the portfolio companies you have? Do you feel that you feel assured that you're going to reach the goals?
I really have hopes that, I think I come away from particularly this conference and the interactions that I've had with, I think, more positivity than coming in. It is a dark time though. We have to reflect on the events clearly in Eastern Europe, and that is always in the back of your mind that these people are suffering. And also, it's a huge challenge. The climate challenge is we've already had a lot of impacts of climate change, and it's not going to be easy to deliver this net zero pathway. So I do worry that we will slip behind, but what is impressive to see is the range of technologies and solutions that are out there that can be, if we put the capital in and we do the projects, then we have the tools at our disposal.
If you would say, like, my question is, like, what hurdles are there to overcome? And I understand that there's so many. If you would pick out, like, the 3 biggest hurdles we need to overcome, what would you say then?
I think it's probably something around moving to actual breaking ground on projects, and something around actually fast tracking and approvals and government approvals and permitting and things like that. I was reflecting on both COVID. I mean, we achieved as a society, we achieved an extraordinary amount during COVID, and the speed with which we brought vaccines to bear on this issue was staggering. Under intense pressure, we managed to accelerate innovation in the most extraordinary way. And it's a little bit like, perhaps in my country, in the UK, during the Second World War, the change that was achieved in industry and technology in those 5-6 years, it was like an acceleration of innovation because of this war that was going on. It was this necessity to do it. And what I'm interested in is, how do we create the same conditions like we had in COVID to really accelerate? Because if we can get everything onto more of a war footing on climate, I feel that we could potentially accelerate what we're doing. I slightly worry that our progress is a bit too slow at the moment.
So to summarize, what would be the 3 hurdles we need to overcome?
The 3, I think it's sort of planning. I think it's planning, permitting, and probably public acceptance, I would say, of these technologies, and getting them to scale.
Interesting. I'm sure that it's quite interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I think that it needs collaboration from all different players in this, and no one can actually be excluded out of it.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Let's move into a lighter subject. Let's get to know Matthew a little bit.
Now it's time for conscious questions.
I'm curious. What have you done for the climate this week? Have you seen anything bad done to the climate this week? Or do you want to tell me about your guilty pleasures?
I definitely don't want to tell you about my guilty pleasures. So I will. I'll tell you something totally bonkers that I see a lot in the country where I live. So I live in the south of England. I live near London and spend a lot of time in London. And as people listening to the podcast may know, I was going to say the English, but the British generally do like to go to the pub and drink a beer, and they like to do that in summer and in winter. But unfortunately, what I have seen, which is I think the most crazy climate idiocy, is the outdoor pub heater, which is, if any, I don't know if you have them where you come from in Sweden, but
we do.
You have them as well. Probably you have them in winter as well. So
we have winter many months of the year.
So what is it? It's just the most crazy thing that you would attempt to heat the outside with a gas heater in order to keep your drinkers warm. And I always think, oh my God, we are totally screwed. We're trying to heat the outside with gas heaters. So that is my most stupid climate action that I've seen recently. Actually, not in here in Houston because it's quite warm, but certainly back in London.
You should have seen in Sweden, we have something called midsummer. Midsummer is 21st of June. Yeah. And it's always very cold, but the Swedes want to sit outside. So you see every house sitting outside with heaters everywhere instead of going in. So we had to admit to that too. Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with you. There are a lot of lessons to learn from this. Yeah. Definitely. I want to move on to more questions about you, because as I said, you have extensive experience in leadership and strategy. What have you learned from your leadership role in the global energy transition?
Well, I think, what's so interesting about the energy transition and sustainability is that it's like for companies and organizations, it's like this amazing strategic gift, because we know that to survive as a species, we have to address climate change. We have to take 50 gigatons a year of CO2 equivalent emissions out of our society. And so it is, to me, it's like the biggest market signal that you'll ever get, that activity in this area will pay off, and you'll be able to create, there will be a market for it. So I think that's really interesting, and I just think it's so interesting how the more progressive organizations with better leadership and better strategies have moved early into this space and have taken positions because they can see the future is already written. We know that we have to decarbonize, and therefore there's going to be a market for these products and technologies to decarbonize society. So that I think is, it's been really interesting and obvious to me, and it's been interesting to see how different companies have taken leadership positions where they've actually seen this not as a risk or regulation that they have to bend to, but as an opportunity to develop new services, new business models to differentiate.
What kind of characteristics would you say that these companies and people and persons have?
I think they're diverse, and I mean that both in terms of, you could say, sort of racially diverse, but also I think diverse in terms of kind of sex and in terms of age as well. And I think it's very important that the leadership of organizations do connect, particularly to younger generations, and listen to younger generations in order to see what's happening and to feel the signals. I like the way that some organizations have brought very young talent right into the decision makings about sustainability or strategy at this stage. We did that in my last company. We did that. We had young leaders join the board when we talked about sustainability, and I think that just helps you be aware of something that you may not be aware of otherwise.
What do you hope, if we see like the leadership you have today, you're meeting a lot of companies, you see good leadership, but you also see not so good leadership. What would you say that you hope the younger generation will do differently than the current leadership?
I think they're already doing it, frankly. I think it's about collaboration. I think, being open and understanding a broad perspective from the world around you. I also think that the young people can really have an impact through many different channels. Certainly for me personally, you're not, I don't know if you have kids. Do you have kids?
I do.
You do have kids.
6-year-old, yeah.
Well, you'll probably feel this as well, but that sort of responsibility for the next generation. And when you actually start finding your kids ask you questions about, what is this climate change thing? And it makes you suddenly, really, think more deeply about what you're doing and where you want to go with your career and what legacy you want to lead. So I would say to, young people, you can also influence the world through your parents as well, in a way. And I've certainly felt that myself as a dad, of responsibility, that's growing.
I love when my 6-year-old tells me that, no, Mom, that doesn't go in that trash bin, it goes over there.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Quite right too. Yeah,
definitely.
I've yet to be able to persuade my kids, though, that they should be having fewer Christmas presents because it's not sustainable. That they won't go that far, of course.
No. My son won't go with the streaming discussion either.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
While we're at the younger generation, in a sense, to be a topic which is seldom discussed and it's a little bit on the edgy side, you're representing oil and gas. They have a reputation of being a bit of the villains in this, but we still need the younger generations to move into that in order to change it. What would you say to them? That?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the oil and gas community is aware that it's it can be unloved. It's not got the best reputation. It is seen as part of the problem often, and not as part of the solution. But what I would say is, I would say that I think it's really, really important for the oil and gas community to be in the conversation and a part of the conversation about the energy transition. And that is, not least because we still need today, with oil prices sitting at whatever, $130 a barrel, we clearly need hydrocarbons to allow the world to work as we stand right now today. And of course, we're in this transition, but you can't just turn everything off. It doesn't work if you just shut everything off. So I think that's the first point. The transition does need to be, in a way, managed as we transition from one set of fuels or sources of energy to the next. And you can't just kind of drop part of it. It doesn't work. Actually, and that message has come over very loud and clear in this conference we've had here in Houston. But I think the other thing, and this is probably, hopefully, where young people would get engaged, is that now the oil and gas companies are very, very seriously transitioning into these new technologies, and they're doing so bringing capabilities from being able to do big, difficult projects. That's what they do. There is no other industry in the world that can do projects, large, complex projects like mega offshore wind farms or huge hydrogen plants or underground storage of CO2. This is the only industry that can do that and has the capabilities to do that. And I think you can get. I think if you recognise that those capabilities can be transitioned or changed or redirected into the new technologies, then I think you can have a very exciting career as a young engineer or scientist or whatever in one of these organizations.
I heard a conversation during Sarah Week that the oil and gas is in a situation where they they need to survive and thrive, and in order to do that, they need to drastically change.
Yeah.
What do you see are the biggest changes that what changes do you see now? Like, if you look back just a year or two.
Well, I think the changes are really profound, and that the changes are, the way that they run their own operations, because they recognise they have to first get their own house in order, right? Mm-hmm. So that is all about reducing emissions in their operations, reducing methane, which we just talked about, and then second, they're starting to allocate capital from purely, more exploration and more oil and gas development into new technologies, into biofuels or carbon capture and storage, in some cases in offshore wind, hydrogen, and that's real. That is happening. You can see that in the way that the companies are starting to allocate capital to projects. They're buying companies where they don't feel they have capability. They're buying companies which may have capabilities in biofuels or in hydrogen or carbon capture. And some may say that it's not fast enough, but it is happening. And I think the pace will only increase as we go forward, as these companies evolve and transition. And I do hope. I will say I do hope that they will be able to attract young people, because it's really, really critical for them that they do.
What would you say? I mean, as a last piece of this segment, I mean, you've been working with strategy. What kind of advice would you give to companies out there that are like changing? You're just in the middle of seeing how oil and gas are changing. What things can other organizations, industries learn from that change? Is there anything that you can see, like, put this in your strategy and you will move faster?
Yeah, I think get out of your business, go and talk to people, be open. I would say, listen to listen to your staff, particularly what I have found is, I've got really strong resonance and new ideas from right down in the sort of younger generations inside your company, and that can really reaffirm where you should be going and what you should be doing, because these people will be, they will be either the customers of the company or the leadership of the company in the future.
So I think like that. That's very important.
Yeah, I think that's what I would say. So listen to the youth in your company. That would be just a great piece of advice.
If you want to, you can push the button and say that if you don't listen to them, it is.
Just
to give you the chance. There you go.
Okay.
I'm helping you out there.
By the way, I want to take one of these home. Do you have any to hand out or not?
I'll make sure you have one.
I'm slightly worried that my daughter will just be like hitting it the whole time, and I'll never get a word in.
I would never bring one home, actually.
Yeah.
Well, not a bad idea. We actually talked about having an amazing button here as well. So maybe bring the amazing button.
Maybe I'll sponsor one.
If you would pick a subject, something that you really get fired up about, what would that be, if you tell us?
Around sustainability?
Yes.
I think it's a really difficult one. I'm going to pick the subject of consumption. There is a school of thought that technology can solve everything, and that we can carry on and behave, exactly how we want. That 10 billion people on the planet, which will be, the number of people by 2050, can consume in the same way as, let's say, the most consumptive person on the planet, which is probably a Brit or a Swede or an American. I don't believe that. I actually believe, unfortunately, that we have to change our consumption as well as our technology. And what I would,
can you give me an example? What kind of change of consumption we would need to do?
Well, I think we need to recognize that there is pleasure and satisfaction and enjoyment and a good life that can be had with less consumption. It means less travel, less belongings, less waste, probably less food, or certainly less wasted food. And I think that what I'm really interested in, and probably a bit pessimistic about, is the ability for humans to be able to change that pattern. I think one ray of hope was perhaps what we all learned during COVID, which was perhaps to take pleasures and satisfaction from smaller things, time with a family, a walk in the neighborhood, perhaps a vacation in your country, rather than flying to the Maldives or wherever. But but that for me, I do worry about that. I just worry that 10 billion people multiplied by the consumption of the most consuming person on the planet is just, even with technology, is not sustainable, and that. So I think we have to somehow be happier with less in the future, or perhaps have fewer people. But I think it's probably more likely the former than the latter.
What do you think do you think it takes education to get people to understand this, or will it come because we have to, or?
That's hard. I don't know the answer to that, and there's probably education. It's probably. I'm an engineer. It's probably not for an engineer to think that one through, but it is something that we probably need to think about. How do we start to shift behaviours and patterns so that people can find contentment without just such strong consumption?
Interesting. I guess we have to do a follow-up podcast in about 10 years and see.
Yes. See how we're doing. It's so human. I find it's exactly the same. I have things which are not sustainable, which I like. Well,
it's kind of close to the guilty pleasures we all have.
Exactly.
In the end.
What's your guilty pleasure, by the way?
My guilty pleasure is the love of clothes, I would say.
Fast fashion, is it?
Fast fashion. I like the new things coming, and I see the shoe, and I see it's a little bit different than the other one, And but also there to go classic, to go with the things that I really want and to hold on to them. I think that's a new behavior that I'm trying to adopt instead. But I think that comes with, I need to say this, but I think it comes with age a little bit as well, where you feel like you get more comfortable with yourself. But if I see that the guilty pleasure with my goddaughter and like her sisters and stuff, I see that it needs to start earlier, I think.
Yeah, I think it does. That's a tough one. We'll have to do a follow-up to see if things are getting better.
We have to.
In a few years'
a deal.
Okay, you got a deal.
Good. We're moving towards the end, but I have the disruptive questions that we need to put some time on.
Now it's time for the disruptive questions.
What role does oil and gas companies actually have in the green transitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that question that we were talking about before, and people, right? It's the consumption of and the use of fossil fuels, and not just oil and gas. By the way, coal has a large impact as well on this, which has put CO2 into the atmosphere, and so. That's a fact, and so we have to, as the oil and gas community, we have to accept that fact. But as I was saying earlier, not only do we have to continue to keep the lights on until we can transition, because we need to keep society running, but we also need to power the building of the transition. And just to give you an illustration, if you're going to build an offshore wind farm, as we are doing to generate wind power, say in Europe, there's no technology at the moment to actually be able to do that without using hydrocarbons. So the vessels which will go out and put the foundations in will install the turbines, lay the cables, install the transmission platform. Currently they're all powered with marine diesel, and so we actually, that's just an example, right? So we're going to need to actually build the future. We're going to use hydrocarbons to build the future, and then that will help us transition to the low carbon future. And the last point is, just the skills of doing big projects. There's a lot of them: the engineering skills, the technical skills, the planning skills to do some of these very big energy transition projects. Also lie in the oil and gas community, and I think that's why they have to be in the team that's working on this. I think it's back to collaboration, and we all need to be working on it together.
Is it even possible to do this without oil and gas?
No, I honestly, I've spent 10 years of my life in the engineering and construction industry, and currently you can't. For example, you can't build a hydrogen plant. You can't build a wind farm. There are no electric offshore construction vessels. It doesn't exist yet. So in a way, you've got to use the fossil fuels to build the future, and then you've got the future, and then you're set. Then and then it's built, and it will be in place for a long time. And that's what we've got to get to. But you can't just stop using the fossil fuels, otherwise you will never get to the future. I think that's the point.
I guess that the message here is also, again, you were mentioning it earlier, we need to understand that everything is not black or white. There are gray colors on the way. And in order to go from one to another, we really need to help out and hold hands in a completely different way.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's back to that point you made at the very beginning about collaboration, and we have to all work on this together and not leave one group or another group behind, I think.
I must say in the end that I've had a very good experience to see what oil and gas actually are doing. It's been eye-opening to be here at Sarah Week to see all the initiative that's going on. You could walk down the corridors and you didn't see any oil and gas, but you saw geothermal, you saw hydrogen, you saw all of these other solutions, and that's what it was talking about. It was not
Yeah.
So it was really refreshing.
Yeah. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of new technology, and it's going to be a really interesting few years through to 2030. We've got a lot of work to do, but we have a lot of the tools that we need as well.
And I'm going to give you sunshine along the time. So I'm going to boost you as much as I can during these years. I think that we all have our role to play, and it's inspiring to be sitting like this with people that have all these perspectives. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and also the OGCI.
Yeah.
Good. So I gave you sunshine. So now you have to give some sunshine back.
Sunshine.
Can I do two? Is that allowed?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the first, there's a professional and there's a personal sunshine. So the professional one is that hey, we just had our whole team here for a week, and we brought most of our portfolio companies with us. Some of the chief executives came, and some of the business development people, and so the sunshine is out to the rest of my colleagues, my team in OGCI. We've done a fabulous job this week, particularly on the methane pledge that you just talked about there. But also many of the portfolio companies, CEOs who are bringing this amazing technology forward to help solve these problems that we've been talking about. So a big shout out to those guys. But actually the most important bit of sunshine has to go to my wife, Louise, who is back at home with the kids, allowing me to be here in Houston. Having this conversation and attending all of these very interesting meetings. So most of the sunshine goes back to Mrs. Harwood. I don't know whether, will she see it?
Yeah, she can see it. So you can see it.
And to the kids.
And to the kids.
Guys, yeah.
I think it's important to see the people who are closest to us as well. So thank you for that. As a summary, what would you say? Like, we had a conversation. What would you bring with you? What's your takeaways from today and our conversation?
Well, I think it's funny how often our conversations go back to communication at the end, whether it's communication to collaborate or communication to explain, or it's communication to change behavior. So that's sort of my takeaway is just how important it is to keep talking really and keep communicating through as many channels as possible. And this is a really fun channel, and I've really enjoyed this discussion with you. So keep doing what you're doing as well, which is communicating with people.
Thank you. I will definitely do that. That's my calling.
Good for you.
So I guess that we have our calling set now.
Yeah.
But I think that we have a common track, which is making sure that we do the green transition.
Yeah.
So it's going to be super exciting to follow you and the OGCI to make sure to see what we can do together.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we'll come back and we'll give you an update if you like.
I would love that.
Thank you very much.
Good luck, and thank you very much for being part of The Switch.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.